Okay, we're about to get started for our next session. I'm actually very excited to introduce this panel. I feel that we have a great privilege to have this group in the house. I was at the recent MedTech conference, the International MedTech Conference in Toronto, and I heard some of you speak then. So it's very nice to have you here. This panel is Innovations in Health Research and Technology. My name is Sophie Ramirez. I'm doing the research communications for the new Oslo Research Institute for Health Innovation. So this conversation is to explore advancements and their impact on improving patient outcomes, enhancing care delivery, and addressing pressing global health challenges. No pressure. We are looking today to hear from about breakthrough innovations that are reshaping how we approach healthcare, from surgical training and pathology workflows to home health systems that empower independent living. Moderating the panel is Fardan Khan. He's the manager of venture programs at Toronto Metropolitan University. He brings over a decade of experience in venture acceleration, startup operations, and angel investing. We need an angel investor, by the way. At TMUs Brampton Venture Zone, he leads the programs that empower innovative founders, particularly in health, as part of the thriving Brampton's Innovation District. Under Fardan's leadership, the Venture Zone is helping to strengthen the local economy by fostering a dynamic and collaborative tech ecosystem. Joining Fardan today is an exceptional panel of trailblazers who are leading the way in health technology and innovation, including Phillip Mohabir. He's the CEO and founder of Vivo Surgery. Dr. Shamek Biswas, the CEO and president of Technomics. You can pronounce it later. And Kim Rowe, the CEO of Robots. So together they're going to be sharing their experiences, the challenges, and their visions for the future of health research. Thank you. Over to you, Fardan. I think it's on, right?
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, William Osler, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, online. Tiziana, I just want to say a quick thank you to your institute and to the organization for inviting us. I, for one, am super excited to see this sort of institute take place here in Brampton. As you pointed out, we're the only regional early stage healthcare startup-focused organization here, trying to attract and bring and help local entrepreneurs in this region. And I'm joined by some stellar founders. So thank you again for hosting this. So my name is Fardan. I'm the manager. And I'll quickly ask the panelists to introduce themselves one by one. We'll try to keep it short. It's an exercise in brevity for you. But Shomik, we'll start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for having us here today. My name is Dr. Shamek Biswas. I'm a co-founder CEO of Technomics. Sophia, that was very close. Technomics has like a chip name to it. Unfortunately, Technomics. But we're basically in the pathology space where we're building robotics, systems that use ultrasound imaging and AI. And what we're trying to do is build global platforms that automate pathology workflows and cancer diagnostics. Super nice to meet everyone.
Hi, I'm Kim Rowe. Home Health Systems does remote patient monitoring, and I've done lots of different IoT devices over the years, and this is just the latest one.
Hi there, I'm Phillip Mohabir. I'm CEO and co-founder of Vivo Surgery. We're building a smarter way for health systems to build up surgical capacity and conduct surgical research. We essentially made cloud software that leverages cameras already in the operating room to create remote shadowing experiences for higher education and internal training. And most recently, we were privileged to be featured on global news because of the collaboration we did with McMaster's Ukraine Assist project, where we were able to train 18 trauma surgeons spread across Ukraine on a advanced transplant technique without having to send a Canadian surgeon into a conflict zone to do that. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great, wonderful, and thank you for that brief introduction. We'll start broad and on the topic of collaborating with partners, research institutes, or hospitals, or other organizations. How can various stakeholders in your personal experiences help drive further collaboration and within innovation and technology? So maybe since you have Philip, you have it. You can take this
I
first.
can take a step at it. So we really benefited from a partnership that we got with Hamilton Health Sciences. What their research department did was they put a grant together. It was a Drive Spark funding grant where they would give $100,000 to 2 internal innovations within that community, spread out over 2 years. And just having that type of commitment, what it did was it catalyzed entrepreneurship within the health systems. I think they had about 200 applications that came through from various HCPs within there with innovative research projects. We were fortunate to be one of the 2 that ended up benefiting from it. So it just shows that having some sort of funding foundation as well as programmatic structure towards driving innovation within that healthcare ecosystem can lead to incredible results.
So for us, I think one of the key things that we realized probably too late was that you really need, if you want to certify a medical device here in Canada, you really need a hospital in the loop and you really need doctors. And although the technology is something you can do, the certification really requires really hospital integration.
Yeah, Fardan, to answer your question, it's so important. Early stakeholder engagement, it's so critical to what Kim was basically saying, is when you're building a new medical device or biotech related tools, it's so important to have engagement and feedback from clinical partners. One of the things that we really benefited from is finding our early adopters. So we work with 4 hospitals right now, 3 Canadian hospitals and 1 leading hospital in the US. And what we've realized with that engagement is these individuals, they're so open to innovation. They're willing to give it a shot, try it out, and give you critical feedback so you can reiterate your design and just make sure that whatever you're building is something that clinicians can use. One of the things we really lucked out with is we have a partnership with Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, so I fly there quite a bit. And they have a really innovative program where they have a certain amount of funds allocated as like a grant fund. And they basically try to find innovative companies building innovative tools. And within that engagement, what they'll do is use those funds to test out that product within their different departments or within different groups. And for us, that's in pathology. And what I've realized is after that whole engagement, just the feedback we were able to receive is just phenomenal. And all of that feedback that we've received will continue to be used for future regulatory applications, future device applications. So it's super important.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those insights. Again, on that note, what have been some barriers working with organizations or hospitals or research institutes? And from your perspective as a founder for a startup or even a bigger SME, what would be, from your point of view, some ways to help them collaborate faster? So perhaps, there's certain perspectives from their ends, but what would be some suggestion that you could make for future organizations if they're looking to work with startup or innovations? So maybe answer that first barrier piece and then maybe your perspective on the flip side.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a big barrier that I see with a lot of Canadian hospitals is a more of a mindset shift or culture shift within departments. So what I've been sort of seeing is as we've interviewed hundreds of clinicians around the world. And typically what I tend to see is within some of the Canadian hospitals, there are certain clinicians that are very innovative, very engineering minded. They want to innovate, but oftentimes they get bogged down with all the bureaucracy within the departments. So we need to sort of ask ourselves, from a departmental level, how do we empower our clinicians so they can partake in more of these innovation type initiatives? Because as the last presentation showed, there's this whole workflow model where physicians, clinicians are being bogged down with clinical work. They're being burnt out, stressed, right? It's hard to take on those innovation initiatives. So again, more of a departmental shift. One of the things as well, I'll use Mayo Clinic as an example. They have a significant amount of resources compared to our Canadian hospitals. So it makes sense why they have more staff, why they don't have enough like workflow shortages. But one of the things I realize is every time I step foot into Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, you get this energy of innovation. And it's so energizing. It makes you want to innovate, and the whole staff is the same way. So we need to have that same sort of attitude mindset within all of our hospitals here in Canada. And again, the biggest thing is empowering our clinicians who want to innovate in the space to better improve patient care.
I guess I'd add to that you know, you'd only really expect in a hospital environment only 10% of those clinicians to be interested in innovation. That's not something for everybody. It's something for those early adopters. And I think that maybe recognizing those early adopters or finding them in the organization and then talking to them about innovation is probably a really good strategy. So for example, the FDA is in a position where they see remote patient monitoring as the only way to be able to address senior care in the future and actually have affordable health care for all of us. And I'm sure it's the same in Canada. And so at the same time, you know, we've tried to work with, say, Hamilton Health Sciences, and in that over say a 2-year period, they were having difficulty finding anybody that was interested in trying remote patient monitoring technology. So it's just a matter of identifying those people and actually being able to have innovators in that area to work with them.
So I think those were both very comprehensive answers to some of the barriers that exist. And maybe the color I can add to it is kind of from our side as the ones doing these outside innovations from the healthcare systems, we can, I think as founders, can actually streamline a few of these things by being cognizant of some of the bureaucratic barriers or some of the apprehensions to adopting innovations. One of the things we did was we interviewed 30 surgeons before we started building anything. And it wasn't just about figuring out whether or not they would like the product. It was more of what's going to stop them from adopting it. And what became really apparent was just not so much bureaucracy, but the fear of regulatory that would restrict certain things, addressing how patient health information would be managed, addressing liability of trying something new, adding new risk into the operating room for us specifically. So we came up with solutions for that well in advance and had this more global outlook of how we wanted the innovation to be adopted. I think that's partial to why it's been a little bit easier for us to get the type of initial traction. And what's great about that is often with these innovative ideas, you need a proof of concept. You need to show that there is interest and there is results happening from it before it goes further from early adopters and other people kind of rally behind the idea. So I completely understand the sentiment that healthcare systems have barriers that they need to overcome. But at the same time, we as founders also have to do our part in where we play in that ecosystem.
Phil, actually a question for you, since I believe you're working in Europe as well. Have you seen a different mindset, or is there some unique perspective there, or how did that story come about?
So one of our early customers is actually the University of Basel Hospital in Switzerland. We're with 3 of their surgical departments: neurosurgery, maxillofacial, and orthopedics and traumatology. That was an opportunistic opportunity that I just took advantage of through someone in my network introducing me to the right people. But yeah, the sense of wanting to adopt innovation, wanting to stand out and doing new things, especially what's happening in surgery there's a lot of adoption of technologies like 3D printing to make more customizable devices and implants that go into people. And there's research around stem cell laced implants and things like that. So because there's already innovative procedures and it's less of trying to do what's accepted as standard of care and pushing that out, there's more eagerness to use our technology to both showcase and train more people so that eventually this becomes the next standard of care. Because often we're seeing when it comes to surgery, yes, there's the research element of it, but there is some weighting with how much surgeons have adopted a procedure that drives whether or not it's going to be the one that gets compensated and therefore adopted.
Awesome. So again, on the flip side of the part of the barriers, let's say, all three of you have worked successfully with partners. What does a successful partnership look like within the organization once you're inside? Is it dealing with researchers? Is it working with physicians or clinicians? Where does that spectrum lie, or is it different for every different organization? Sure.
So I think that a good partnership obviously has to have benefits for both sides. And I think that to be able to identify those early in the relationship and really make sure that you build a project that supports both the company and the hospital is a really, probably the best approach. You got a win-win situation, and you can produce some really good results from something like that.
And Kim, actually, you nailed it right in the head. I think definitely it has to be wins on both sides. And I'll give an example with our case. So we're obviously targeting a very manual search process that's involved in colon cancer staging. So in most of our collaborations, our first ask is, how are you currently doing this process? What's the economics behind it? Sort of as you guys touched on, right? What's the economics? How much time are you spending? What does that workflow look like for your hospital? And the insights that we're able to generate from that single study objective was so insightful for the hospital labs that they're now being cognizant that, hey, maybe we're not doing the best job on this manual search process. And some of the numbers, just to throw it out there, we were finding that the search process, manual process, the error rates were over 50%, which would cause issues with inaccurate cancer staging. On average, there would be between about an hour and a half being spent on the search process manually. And then it could lead to significant turnaround time delays for the pathology labs. So again, those data insights or those data points were important insights for the lab. And the second part of it, we ended up doing a usability study with the pathology labs, where we would take our prototype into the labs. The staff would test it out, and all of the feedback that they would give to us would be super insightful information for us, that where we can iterate that design and at the end of the day, build a tool that can be super helpful for the pathology labs.
Wonderful. Phil, yeah, do you want to take a
Sure.
step?
So we right now in the middle of a partnership with Dravinsky Cancer Center. And before getting into that, to agree with what my colleagues here said, the two things you always have to ask is there a problem to be solved? And is it pertinent that we solve that problem right now? And that only comes from understanding how it's done right now, and what resources are available, or what's the next best option that's available. And once you've defined that, it becomes a lot easier to figure out which partnerships are likely going to work, because there's that mutual win-win. With the Dravinsky Cancer Center, we started with surgical training. And for this, they have a challenge of needing to upskill nurses to become perioperative nurses. And they have onboarding challenges with getting people to, as we move more towards a model where it's not just the surgeon, it's the whole surgical team, it's the hero in that OR, and we're trying to aim for efficiencies. Being able to show nurses what it's like to have a team that understands each other, have a scrub nurse that has the next instrument on hand before the surgeon even asks for it. These are things that we can't train with video. You have to be there to see it, and we're trying to provide the next best thing. So it's one of those things where we saw a problem. We got the right people within the nursing department to champion it with us, did a POC with a live case just 2 weeks ago, and it's just got everybody really excited in terms of what it means for nurse training moving forward. So that's what a good partnership looks like.
Thanks, Phil. Next question, Kim, directed towards you and the work that you're doing right now. There is a healthcare crisis coming in due to senior care population. What, in your experience, has been the FDA's response to this, and here back in Canada as well?
Well, I guess we've struggled with certifying a product, and the reason we struggled with that, maybe because we haven't worked with a hospital. Our technology works, but the requirements to actually certify it are actually quite onerous and use old technology. In fact, instead of, so for example, you can get a respiration rate from a Masimo Mighty Sat, goes on your finger, and yet the FDA won't use that as a standard that they've already certified as something that we could test against. And that's true in multiple areas. We do vital signs measurement sensor, like you can see it here. And it measures all your vital signs and falls and activity and things like that. But then you have to certify all those different vital signs, and that's like a big hurdle. And so more cooperation with the hospital would really help, and also better and more progressive thinking on the part of both the FDA and Health Canada would certainly help a lot too. There seem to be behind the times.
And I guess a little controversial question for both of you, Shamik and at least Kim. Why is funding for medical devices so hard?
Well, I think right now there's a problem where in 2022 and 2023, there was this rush of medical money, essentially. And because there was all this medical money that went in, now we're in a position where the money, because the market is slow, money is not coming out. So it's a complicated answer, but the limited partners don't have their money back from previous investments, and they need that to make new investments. So right now it's really tough times. However, there is sort of light at the end of the tunnel, at least in the American market, and it looks like things are starting to free up now, but that's just starting. And that's part of the reason. I think there's, I did my first startup when I was much younger, many years ago. And I think then it was much, much easier to raise money. And I think there's a lot more competition now. And I think that's another reason.
Shamik?
I would say the medical space, when you're innovating in it, there's a lot of different factors that you have to think about. Kim mentioned FDA regulatory is one big one. You have to think about IP, quality management systems, your R&D procedures, your usability testing. There's so many things to think about. So when an investor hears that you're building a hardware company with software, in their head, they're thinking hardware, wait, it has the letters hard. Oh, bad investment. But that's not necessarily true. And I think for those of us that are in this space, we're truly passionate about solving complex challenges in healthcare. So there needs to be a bit of passion that I think all of us share. But from a fundraising landscape, I'll give some examples. So about 9 months ago, we closed a $2.1 million seed round or pre-seed round. And just to give people context, we pitched to 205 Canadian investors. I had about 15 investors convert, so it's about a 7.8% conversion rate, which is not bad. But that being said, the issues that I was sort of seeing is when I was pitching an idea about pathology tools, Tiziana mentioned earlier hidden work not being recognized. Pathology is one of those fields where there's so much work, great work being put in, but it's not being recognized. So when I'm pitching to investors, some of them may not be familiar with pathology. So there's a bit of hesitancy right off the bat, like, hey, maybe I don't want to invest because I don't have I'm not familiar with this space. So that's one. But the second part is we don't have a lot of medical device investors as well in Canada. And those investors typically will invest in later stage startups. But when you're at an early stage, there's a ton of risk that you still have to mitigate with funds. So yes, you can apply for grant funding through CIHR. It takes a while, as it was mentioned previously. Or you can rely on your academic collaborators at the hospitals who can apply for grants and work with you together. But it's been funny because after we closed our round, the last 4 months, I've said no to investors. And it's just strangest behavior I've ever seen, because a year ago, everyone was saying, no, like, you guys are too early. But now after we've hit our milestones, everyone's saying, well, can we invest in you guys? Like, not right now, maybe next year when we start raising. So it's just, again, the mindset shift that certain hospitals have to see, but investors as well in Canada. So that's just my controversial take on the controversial question.
Congrats to you and your team on getting over that barrier, Phil. Any words on that?
Nothing wrong with my medical device. I think the only thing I can say, investment in general, it's something my old boss used to tell me. Nobody wants to be first, but everyone's first to be second. And I think Shobik actually proves that.
That's a good point. Let's jump gears and talk like a little bit broader about what's happening in the market right now. Because obviously there was the macroeconomic environment about the time when you were raising as well in the last couple of years. And now our thesis is, and then we're glad to see work like here at William Osler happening, the City of Brampton MedTech Task Force coming together. Our thesis is in the next coming years, in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a huge push and momentum in life sciences and health tech. What sort of headwinds do you see in the future and also tailwinds, if I can broadly ask?
Probably not the best one to answer that one since we're not biotech. So might pass it to the other two.
So I see I think you have to separate pharma from medical devices for a start. I think the pharma process to actually bring a product to market is pretty well defined here in Canada and in the US, and it works. And it's pretty seamless. I think on the med tech side, medical devices, it's, I don't know, maybe my colleagues can explain the process at Health Canada to me, but I don't think anybody understands it, not even the director of the program. And they just don't have a clear model. I was at AdvaMed like 3 weeks ago, and the thing that they seemed to, everybody, it was a room full of 200 people, they agreed that, in fact, medical device stuff in Canada, what usually happens is that they struggle for a while, then it's sold to an American company, they get American investment, and then they bring it back to Canada. And that kind of behavior and that kind of thinking just has to be vanquished, or we'll just never be successful with medical devices here. Like we might have a few, and sounds like my colleagues are doing quite well there, but I'm thinking that, you know, we're on the verge of being in that model that all these experts are saying this is the way it works in Canada.
Yeah, I have to think about this one for a bit. I think the biggest thing that I think the Brampton ecosystem is doing really well is there's so many good discussions happening about how do we do better for patients. And one of the big things that I think will be really important in the coming years is building that foundation or infrastructure to support different companies at different stages. So what I mean by that is, for example, if you're a graduate student or you're a medical student or you're just interested in innovation, and you're looking to find the right colleagues, right? Where do you start? Like, where do you even start if you have an idea to build something? Well, BVZ, Brampton Venture Zone, is a good start. You apply to these accelerators, you meet with other like-minded people, and you build your team, right? Once you have your team established, you build an MVP. You have your MVP, you need to test with a clinical partner, and hopefully that clinical partner is at Osler. You test it, you learn from it, you de-risk parts of your business with that clinical information, and then the next step up would be fundraising. Right? So it could be through non-dilutive funding like grants, or it could be through investment funding, right? So really it's a question of, do we have the right foundation infrastructure built right from the get-go? And how do we continue supporting those companies as they start migrating through those different phases of that startup's life cycle? Because if you're at a later stage startup, maybe you need more clinical trial support. So maybe you need clinicians to support a larger scale clinical trial so you can run those trials, use those data points for regulatory applications, get approval, and hopefully, you get the sales and you start publishing those data points. So I guess my biggest thing is building that infrastructure. And the second point is, for our device, we use AI. So the image data sets that we're building right now, that doesn't exist anywhere. So we have to take our robot into the clinics, build those image data sets. So what I could sort of foresee happening is sometimes if there's a lot of bureaucracy between access to those data sets or ownership of those data sets, then I could see a bit of dilemmas happening there. So there needs to be a streamlined process with the hospitals and the companies where they can come to a mutual agreement that's a win-win, and also protecting patient privacy where you can continue building off of that innovation.
I was waiting till how long would pass before someone said AI. So I'm impressed that it came out so late in this discussion. But on that, and on the digital health side, how do you see AI affecting this sector, your research, your work, and other innovations coming about?
So AI is a tricky one in surgery, in that I guess ultimately we want to get to a point where during a surgery, using computer vision, we're able to predict what could lead to a complication or a readmission, and autocorrect in real time. The problem with that is the data sets that we're training right now are a bit of a black box. And because we don't have access to kind of the population health that's training that, we don't know what biases are being transferred into those models. Even at that, I think from my experience in surgery, people are overselling what they can do with AI right now. A lot of the talk has been about increasing surgical workflow through AI models. If you actually go and do a deep dive in it, for the most part, it's just instructing people how to scrub down the operating room faster. It's not really doing anything for patient care. So we're still a ways out. Similar challenge with what Shomik's facing. Like, what we would like to do is get to the point where the content that we create recording these surgeries can be used to assist in making the operative note. And we've actually partnered with Google Cloud to build out that model. One of the ways that we're trying to do it is through a federated learning model, where we're building individual models at every single hospital partner that we work with. And that also feeds into a more global model that we're training. It's definitely something that can be transformative for healthcare. I think we just have to approach it with caution. And, you know, our mantra at Vivo Surgery is really about celebrating and sharing the expertise that the surgical staff has. So we also want to be careful of not letting a black box overpower what that expertise, that honed expertise is that's coming from the human.
I have a couple of comments on the AI side of things. I think one of the things that we found was that, you know, you'd think for something so basic as vital signs measurement, there'd be lots of good databases and information available so that you could actually run an AI model. But, you know, that's a fiction. It doesn't really exist, right? So if you're looking at a broad set of data, including, say, cuffless blood pressure or something, like that's something you just won't find out there. So I think that what we need is some kind of standards so that we can have databases that are broadly usable. Like in the software engineering world where I came from, like that's pretty common. But on the AI side of things, I don't think that exists yet. And obviously, you know, from a care point of view, predictive analytics is where everyone's going. And sort, you know, there is vital signs models out there, and that take, in fact, all your hospital data and actually generate predictive results. So I think that that's really where that's all going.
Jeremy.
Yeah, no, Kim, that's a great sort of insights there. Like AI are these like massive prediction machines where you're using massive amounts of data sets. Now, in order to get the right predictions or the right outputs from your models, you need to make sure you have good labeled data and good ground truth data. Because as the last presentation, the presenters mentioned, garbage in is garbage out. And it's the same thing with AI models. So for us, one of the biggest things is, you know, we're using our robot to essentially find lymph nodes in surgically removed colon cancer tissues. So we know, you know, in the healthcare space, there's a ton of health inequities where certain demographics of patients aren't getting good lymph node searches done. Now, there's a lot of correlation studies, not necessarily causation. And because there's no tools out there, it's hard to know what's actually causing the reasons why these search processes are not being efficient for certain demographics of patients. So where I'm going with this is, for us right now, we're looking for hospital sites that have diverse patient populations. And what we're planning to do is hopefully collect diverse lymph node data sets from different patients and be able to train our algorithms to make sure it's picking up lymph nodes across a diverse group of patients. Because the last thing you want is, for example, in Minnesota, there's a very specific demographic group. You collect lymph nodes and you train your algorithm, and imagine you applying it to Brampton, which has a very diverse ecosystem. It may not work well, right? So that's a really important part, because again, having good labeled data sets that represents a diverse population becomes super, super important. And it's why hospitals like Osler and other hospitals, you know, it's really good to have be involved in these types of innovation projects, because you can bring technology into your ecosystem that will benefit patients in your population.
Thank you for those insights. I think we're going to close off our discussion. Any last comments for William Osler, the Research Institute, the partners in the room, and how can we see more of this work? I know you alluded it to earlier, but what would you see like more happening in this regional ecosystem?
I'm already excited to be here. The fact that I'm here is already a great start, because I know back in 2022-ish, a lot of the labs were pinched because of COVID, because of the labs were just being overworked, understaffed. So the fact that these discussions are happening right now and the new medical schools being built, Oslo's participating in a lot of innovation initiatives. I hope down the road we'll be able to participate in bringing our tech here and hopefully collaborate as well and look at workflow challenges and quantifying ergonomic issues that our pathology staff are facing, because they're really doing amazing work. And it's, as Tiziana mentioned, it's hidden work. And I hope with our mission, we bring more light to the amazing clinicians here and empower them with tools that can make their lives just easier.
I guess the only thing I'd say in closing is that remote patient monitoring is really the future of healthcare. And I think it'd be really important if we just try and figure out how to focus on that and make sure that we can deliver healthcare to all these seniors, because there's a huge rush coming and we should be prepared.
Like I said, I'm very happy with the direction everything is going, especially with the launch of this institution. For us, like, we're looking at surgery and the problems with it more from a surgical capacity and building the workforce for it. The thing that I think we're all aware of, we have an aging population. We're going to be doing 20 to 30% more procedures a year, 5 years from now because of that. At the same time today, 1 in 4 surgeons and members of the surgical workforce are over the age of 65. So we're going to need to do more surgeries while a surge of retirements happens in the background. So any type of institutions that we can partner with to help build that surgical capacity and also understand what's happening in terms of the population health and the way that interventions are being done is a positive for making something that'll be more universally adopted.
Okay, we don't want you guys to close off just yet,
Yes.
because we do have some questions from the online population. They were asking if each of you could give a little snapshot about your motivation and your story about why you chose this field of work and how you got where you are.
Yeah, so for me, it was, I mean, trying to condense the story, I was hoping to become a neurosurgeon when I was doing my undergrad at U of T. I got hired to go somewhere completely different. And then in the middle of COVID, my co-founder, who's a neurosurgeon, I was introduced to him. He had the challenge of not being able to have students come into the operating room to shadow him. We had a couple beer conversations of how we could make Zoom for the OR. Tested it out, got amazing results. I was still iffy about doing the deep dive of jumping into venture full time. So kind of set some barriers, set some traps for myself to say that this wouldn't work and it would fail. Like trying to see if people would be willing to pay for it and things like that before we even built a product. We had a wait list for, we opened it to the world for people to join and attend one of these sessions. Within 2 months, we had 1,000 medical students from 200 schools sign up, pledging to give $100 to come in. And that was something that was where I saw that there might be something here where, we could commercialize this. We're bootstrapped. We're just going off of our revenue instead of doing venture raise right now. But that was ultimately it. I saw an opportunity to make an impact and do things differently where we didn't rely on the traditional model of getting lots of money up front and really just driving impact one hospital at a time. And that's been my motivation ever since, just how many more can we impact?
That's a great question. I don't think I've been asked that before, but I think that for me, I started off my career building weapon systems. And I migrated out of that because I didn't really want to build weapon systems. I wanted to build a better world. And I guess eventually I came back to, what I feel is really important, which is people's health and making sure that everybody's safe and secure. And that's why we built tools to actually help seniors make sure that they're safe at home and that their families could interact with them and they could know at any instant in time that they're safe. And that's really what motivated me.
For me, I think there's these two key events in my life that sort of helped shape the trajectory of what I'm doing today. The first event, I grew up in Niagara my whole life, so not too far away from here. My younger brother at the age of 2 was diagnosed with a condition called fibrous dysplasia, which is basically a condition where that impacted his tibia bone. So when he was 2 years old, he was missing his tibia bone. And I remember I was around 7, 8, around that time. We went to the hospital down there, and the radiologist did an x-ray of his leg and asked my dad, where's his bone? And my dad's like, what? So what we ended up doing is we took my brother to Toronto Sick Kids Hospital, and the head orthopedic surgeon had a background in genetics, and he did this innovative surgery where he collaborated with a group in Montreal, and they put an intramedullary rod in my brother's leg to act as a scaffold, and they took bone marrow chips out of his hip and basically allowed a tibia bone to grow over many, many years. So at 7, 8, I had to read research into this disease condition and explain to my parents in a very lay manner because they were immigrants to Canada at the time. So I developed a passion for trying to understand disease mechanisms, which is why I pursued my training in pathology. And then fast forward a couple of years, when I was around 17, my aunt was diagnosed with colon cancer at 46. And because of improper colon cancer staging, she passed away at 47, where she left behind 3 young children. So her story is one of the reasons I do what I do and I love what I do, is being able to contribute to the medical field by new innovations to make sure that no one's aunt, siblings, mom, dad, or partners get impacted with these conditions without the intervention of medical innovations. So it's a bit about my story.
Thanks so much. That was very inspiring. And the fact that you were all here after so many years in the business, and it's a complex system with obviously no defined pathway for medical devices. So the fact that you all sit there and are talking about some of the successes you've had is amazing. So thank you. My question goes back to Phil. You mentioned that when you were doing all your research work with the surgeons, that you found regulatory barriers would be one of your biggest barriers. You mentioned you found ways around that, and I was just wondering if you could share a few more details on that.
Yeah. So I think to make it concise, the big regulatory barrier was like, is it a medical device or is it not? And that really hinges on, first, are you very basic? Are you putting something on or in the patient? And then second would be, is it influencing a decision that goes into the way care is delivered to them? For those reasons, we kind of said, okay, let's kind of scope it back as making it more of a training tool at the beginning, rather than something that is real-time collaboration that's causing an actual outcome, patient outcome, to be impacted. And just that little pivot in the way that we scoped out the project allowed us to play in the space of training that gave us far more traction and far more surgeries that we could do, learn from, and build a better product.
Could each of you list your top 3 things that organizations could do to facilitate the process?
I think that for us, a discussion with directly with hospitals, trying to find a good fit for remote patient monitoring would be the first thing. The second thing would be probably more discussions, like often hospitals have home care associated with them, or long-term care, and also discussions with those home care services, and long-term care would probably be number 2 and 3.
Maybe a streamlined system that can allow us to connect with these early adopters or clinicians, superstar clinicians in the departments. I think that's sort of a first step to allow for these conversations. The second part, I mean, obviously this always depends on budget, and I know how hospitals can be budget constrained, but if there is a pocket of innovation funds, and I know the government's working on that right now, if there's a pool of funding support that could be used to support early stage companies to allow them to test their MVPs, get clinician buy-in, I think that will go a super long way. And the third point that I'd love to see, again, this is more of a larger discussion, is how do we handle procurement of Canadian technologies? Because I know, at least in pathology, sometimes what ends up happening is, you know, you have homegrown tech, and it sort of goes to the end stage, and you're competing against the massive companies like BD or Thermo Fisher, right? So how can we better support our local startups? Hopefully, we can build first-in-class products as well. But from a procurement standpoint, how can we help alleviate that process and make it less of a challenge for our local startups?
For me, it's just one. It's figuring out who's the right person to talk to about innovation. And often we don't know who that person is in the hospital. So if that was a little bit more clear, I'd say 80% of the problems would be solved.
Love that. Another great segue. So first of all, thank you so much. This has been an amazing opportunity to just listen and hear and be present with your stories, and then to be inspired. In our research institute is really wanting to hear from our own in Brampton, and for others to bring their work to our city and to our region. Now I got to be inclusive because it is Brampton and Toronto, Etobicoke. And that was the intention of our institute, to have one door where you come in and you didn't need to know the org structure, right? You just need to know that the door is located here and just open it, and then we'll have the conversation. So I think that that's a great thing. Your comments around the procurement are really relevant. You know, we're just going through a really big procurement right now, and there has to be we're risk averse. Healthcare is a risk averse industry. And so, you know, going with a recognized company with 20 years and, you know, 60 sites is very different than a startup. And so I don't want that to be, I don't want that to be a barrier. So what's the sandbox that we can create, right? What's the platform that we can create that exposes individuals like yourselves with this expertise? How do we create that sandbox where we put the clinicians in with you to just be inspired, right? Because it's the whole thinking about the synergy between clinicians and researchers and innovators. That's the space we want to play in, because we know that together we'll get a better product. So those are my comments. Thanks.
Okay, Fardan, can you give us a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening in Brampton? What's cool? What is innovative? What's going on here?
These founders right here are example. I mean, we've had the pleasure of working with Shamik and Phil earlier as well. But sitting at the ground level, Tiziana, to your point, us as an accelerator of early stage companies, we can be that conduit who bring early stage founders, researchers who are working on very innovative and motivated technologies and bringing them here. And right now is perfect timing. We're gearing up for a new cohort. Each year we work with 10 to 12 companies. So for example, just very on our level, we're interviewing founders from across Canada, and we want to bring their innovations to Brampton. So whether it's putting them in front of partners like TMU, William Osler, or even the city of Brampton, that's the role we want to play in attracting and also growing like the homegrown talent and attracting that as well. So I think, Sophia, to your question, there's lots of cool things, but I think the founders are the ones that are working on it. But we get to have a front row on that, and I'm very glad that we're here, and I look forward to more collaborations on that.
Hi, I'm very curious. How do you think patients can get involved in supporting and shaping innovation, whether it's here at Osler or in Brampton, Peel? Or how do you see patients' voices being embedded in innovation?
That's a great question. And maybe I can give a bit of context here before I answer. So pathology work, I kept on referencing to Ziana about hidden work. It's actually pretty funny because when you speak with patients, oftentimes they don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. So I think a big part of our job is to help with education and awareness. And maybe, to Ziana's point about the sandbox for innovation, maybe a requirement could be for companies or the clinicians to have a session where there's patient engagement, because they're an extremely important stakeholder because you're building tech for them, right? So one of our big things is oftentimes I look at different advocacy groups for cancer, and we try to educate, do presentations on what we're building on. I've done a couple presentations at long-term care homes, and that awareness is just so important. Because in order to have more awareness of your condition, when patients are equipped with this type of knowledge, it just takes the discussions to a whole nother level. So patient awareness and education is a big thing for us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Patient awareness is really important. I think that if you actually look and talk to seniors, 98% of them want to age in their homes. I mean, it's just such a fundamental truth of aging and care. So I think that all we have to do is listen to that statistic, and we'll deliver what the seniors need.
Yeah, similarly with raising awareness, and I mean, for us, it's considering population health, an aging population health, more surgeries being needed. Surgery is about as invasive as it gets on a patient, and many times patients don't know what the surgery entails. I remember when my grandma needed to get the surgery, I had to explain the details to the entire family so they could understand what the process would look like, and at the same time, let them know that these type of surgeries are normal and there's low risks of complications and things like that. So one of the things we're looking at is how do we build our connections to the surgical expertise that we have and create something that is available more to the public to educate patients and make them more informed when they're making a decision on what procedure they'll undertake.
That's great. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to all of you on the panel. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience and giving us perspective of what you have to do to get where you are. We appreciate, and it's been a very great session. We're just going to open up for the next group, and we look forward also to hearing about what happens in the future.